The sprawling alien military academy was known as one of the most rigorous training centers in the galaxy. Across planets and star systems, it attracted the elite from hundreds of different species, each vying for a chance to join the ranks of the most formidable warriors in the universe. The academy was built into the core of an ancient, craggy asteroid, its sharp edges piercing through the dark expanse of space. The Academy's name alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of many. Its reputation for producing the strongest soldiers in the galaxy was unmatched. Commanders from across the stars traveled to observe the training, hoping to recruit the best of the best for their forces. Among the species that enrolled in the Academy were those from far-flung worlds, each possessing unique attributes and skills. The Centaur, with their glowing skin and telekinetic powers, the Tarkans, who were massive and incredibly strong, and the Xerans, masters of stealth and speed. These species, along with many others, had all proven themselves worthy of the Academy's toughest challenges. But even with all their advanced abilities, none of them were prepared for the arrival of the latest recruit, a human. The alien commanders, who had seen thousands of students from countless worlds, watched with thinly veiled skepticism as the human named Alex stepped off the shuttle. Alex appeared unremarkable to the trained eyes of the commanders. They had heard the rumors of humans, their incredible resilience, their instinct for survival, and their ability to adapt to any situation. But the commanders also knew that the Academy's survival training was no simple task. The simulations were grueling, designed to break even the most advanced species. They doubted that a simple human, especially one with no advanced powers or enhancements, would be able to withstand the intense pressure. As Alex walked through the towering gates of the Academy, the eyes of every instructor, every commander, and every cadet followed them. Whispers ran through the crowd. Humans had a reputation for surviving extreme environments, but no one had ever attempted the Academy's survival course. A course that stretched over the span of a year, pushing participants through simulations of the most dangerous terrains, climates, and ecosystems imaginable. It was a test of endurance, intellect, and mental resilience. No one had ever completed it in less than 12 months. The commanders expected Alex to fail miserably, just like every other recruit who had entered the Academy with a similar reputation. Alex's first moments on the training grounds only added to the commander's doubts. The human stood in the center of the arena, looking around seemingly calm. In contrast, other recruits would have been shaking with nerves, eyes wide with fear at the thought of what awaited them. But not Alex. The human's gaze was steady, almost unnerving in its quiet confidence. For a moment, the commanders exchanged glances. Was this arrogance or something else? They couldn't tell yet, but they were certain that it wouldn't last long. The course was set to begin in mere hours, and the alien commanders were already making plans to monitor the humans' progress. They had seen recruits fail before, many of them much more powerful than Alex. The first stage of the survival training was designed to be the most brutal and uninhabited world, filled with dangerous creatures, unpredictable weather, and hostile terrain. No one had ever returned from the first stage without enduring significant hardships. The human would surely crumble under the pressure. The idea of humanity being a serious contender in the Academy's training program seemed laughable to them. When the time came for the recruits to enter the simulation, Alex was the first to step forward. A cold metallic door slid open before them, leading into a dark void that swallowed all light. The human stepped through without hesitation, disappearing into the unknown. The commanders were poised, watching through the Academy's surveillance systems, waiting to see how long it would take for Alex to succumb to the dangers of the environment. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The world outside the door was a desolate wasteland, jagged rocks, scorching heat, and no signs of life anywhere. The simulation was designed to test not just physical endurance, but mental strength. It was a place where the mind could easily break under the strain. The commanders were confident that Alex wouldn't last long. They watched closely, waiting for the human to make the first mistake. Hours passed, and the first signs of surprise began to show. Alex hadn't failed. The human was adapting. Where other recruits might have floundered in the harsh conditions, Alex moved with purpose. Instead of stumbling through the rocks, Alex surveyed the environment, taking in every detail: the way the wind shifted, the pattern of the rocks, the way the sun's rays reflected off the harsh landscape. It was as though the human was reading the world like an open book, a book that none of the other recruits could even begin to understand. The commanders, growing more intrigued by the minute, began to study Alex's movements. They could see how the human used the terrain to their advantage, moving swiftly across the wasteland as though it were second nature. It wasn't just survival instinct at work, it was something deeper. Alex wasn't merely surviving, they were thriving. Every challenge that came their way, every creature that emerged from the shadows, Alex seemed to handle it with ease. The creatures, which were known to be aggressive and nearly impossible to tame, hesitated when they encountered the human. Alex didn't fight them with violence. Instead, they used calm, steady movements that calmed the creatures, as though understanding them in a way no one else had. The commanders were now baffled. How could this human, who had no special abilities or enhancements, be so competent? They began to question their initial assumptions about humanity. Alex's progress was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The human didn't just survive the first stage, they had begun to master it.as the day turned into night. The commanders gathered in a control room, still unsure of what to make of the situation. They had expected the human to fall apart, to give up, to break under the pressure. But Alex was doing something no one had ever done before, navigating the course like a seasoned veteran, as though the dangers of the simulation were nothing more than minor inconveniences. The commanders could feel the weight of their disbelief growing heavier with each passing moment. As the simulation continued, Alex's reputation began to grow among the other recruits. They had never seen anything like it. Some began to wonder if the human had somehow found a cheat code to the system, while others simply couldn't fathom the strength and intelligence required to overcome such a brutal environment. The Academy had always been a place where the strongest and most capable species came to prove themselves. But now, the human had become an enigma, a living, breathing puzzle that no one could solve. The alien commanders watched in stunned silence, their doubts replaced with a dawning realization they had underestimated humanity. They had written off the human as just another recruit. But now they understood that Alex was something much more, a force of nature that could not be easily categorized or defeated. The Academy was about to face a challenge unlike any they had ever seen before. The Alien Military Academy was not for the faint of heart. It was a place where only the strongest, most skilled, and most resilient species could hope to survive. For decades, it had been the training ground for warriors from all corners of the galaxy, each one subjected to a survival course that pushed them beyond their limits. No one had ever completed the course in less than a year. The tests were designed to break the will of even the toughest soldiers, challenging them with extreme conditions and vicious environments. Those who could endure would emerge as the elite, prepared for any battle or mission the galaxy might throw at them. The course was feared, respected, and legendary. And now, Alex, a human, an outsider among beings far more advanced, was about to face it. The Academy's commanders had watched with skepticism as Alex entered the training arena. The human's unassuming presence seemed out of place in a place like this. Alex had already surprised them by surviving the first stage, but that was nothing compared to what lay ahead. The survival course was broken into several stages, each more challenging than the last. The first test had been a relatively simple simulation, dangerous, yes, but manageable for anyone with basic survival skills. But now, the real challenges would begin. The commanders were already certain that Alex wouldn't last. They were ready to watch as the human stumbled and failed. But as the countdown to the next stage began, Alex stood tall, ready to face the unknown. The survival course was an unforgiving beast. It began the moment the recruits were dropped into a hostile world, filled with violent creatures, harsh weather, and unpredictable terrain. No species had ever come through it unscathed, and it had been carefully designed to push every recruit past their breaking point. Alex, however, showed no signs of fear or hesitation. While others had trembled at the thought of what lay ahead, Alex walked forward with a quiet determination, eyes scanning the horizon. The human didn't seem daunted by the thought of facing the unknown. The commanders watched through their hidden surveillance systems, their expressions unreadable as they prepared to witness the inevitable failure. The world Alex had been dropped into was a barren wasteland, its surface cracked and scorched by constant heat storms. There was no vegetation, no signs of life, just endless stretches of rocky terrain that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick and dry, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting an oppressive heat that would wear down even the strongest of beings. The first challenge was simple, yet cruel: a series of long, exhausting miles across the scorching desert. Most recruits would have collapsed from the heat within hours, but Alex seemed to move with ease. Instead of struggling with the weight of the environment, the human used the terrain to their advantage, finding patches of shadow beneath rock formations, conserving energy with each step. The commanders couldn't believe their eyes. As said, the hours ticked by. The temperature soared even higher, but Alex's resolve remained unbroken. While other recruits had begun to slow down, stumbling and struggling under the relentless heat, Alex pressed forward without hesitation. The commanders exchanged glances, bewildered. This was supposed to be the part of the test that defeated all who entered. Yet Alex appeared unfazed by the brutal conditions. The commanders had expected to see failure within the first few hours, but instead they saw a human who was surviving and thriving, pushing through what should have been an insurmountable obstacle. Soon, the next challenge emerged. A deadly sandstorm, one of the most feared obstacles in the course, swept across the desert, its winds howling and its grains of sand sharp enough to slice through skin. It was a storm that had broken many recruits before, sending them into blind panic, forcing them to abandon the course in search of shelter. The commanders anticipated that Alex would make the same mistake. They expected the human to panic, to lose their sense of direction, to fall victim to the storm's overwhelming power. But once again, Alex proved them wrong. Instead of running for shelter, Alex paused for a moment, feeling the wind, watching how the sand swirled in the air. They took a deep breath, then continued walking, head down, body angled into the storm to minimize the force of the wind. It was as though Alex had anticipated this challenge long before it arrived. The storm raged for hours, but Alex didn't stop. When the storm finally began to subside, the human was still standing, untouched by the fierce winds and blinding sand. The commanders, who had watched this from their control room, could hardly believe what they were seeing. Every recruit who had faced this storm before had been forced to give up, but Alex had endured, not just surviving but doing so with a level of calmness that defied logic. The commanders were starting to realize that they couldn't predict what would happen next. This human, this creature from a violent, untamed world, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. But the course was far from over. As Alex continued forward, the challenges only grew more dangerous. The next stage involved a series of massive, predatory creatures that roamed the landscape. These beasts were quick, intelligent, and aggressive, hunting in packs, and they were more than capable of taking down even the strongest recruits. The commanders watched as Alex approached the territory of the creatures, expecting the human to make a fatal mistake. But instead of rushing headfirst into danger, Alex took a moment to observe the creatures from a distance. They watched their movements, noted their patterns, and began to plan. Most recruits would have relied on brute force or tried to outrun the creatures. But Alex did neither. The human crouched low to the ground, blending into the environment as they carefully circled around the creatures, avoiding direct confrontation. It was a strategy that none of the commanders had expected: a quiet, tactical approach instead of charging into battle. Alex wasn't trying to fight the creatures. Instead, the human was outsmarting them, using the environment to their advantage, creating distractions, and carefully manipulating the beast's movements. The creatures were confused, unable to track the human's movements. And when one of the predators turned too far from its pack, Alex seized the opportunity, darting past it without a sound, leaving the creatures behind. The commanders stared at the screens in disbelief. Alex wasn't just surviving the course. The human was mastering it, outthinking the challenges that even the Academy's best recruits had struggled with. The commanders had assumed that the survival course would be impossible for a human. But now, they were forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humanity. Alex's ability to adapt to each situation, to survive in ways that no other species could, was becoming clearer by the minute. By the time night fell, the human had made it through the first stage with astonishing ease. The commanders, once confident that Alex would fail, were left in stunned silence. They had underestimated this human in every way. What they thought would be a brief, doomed attempt to survive, had turned into a masterclass in resilience and strategy. The survival course, which had broken so many, had become a proving ground for Alex's strength and determination. And as the night stretched on, the commanders knew that this was just the beginning. They were witnessing something incredible, something they hadn't expected, and they couldn't wait to see what would come next. The cold winds of the desolate planet howled around Alex as they trudged forward, their body battered and their mind exhausted. This was not supposed to be possible. No being could survive the kind of challenges this alien survival course presented. But Alex was doing it. Against all odds, they were still moving, still alive. The commanders who oversaw the course had already watched countless recruits fail, each of them succumbing to the brutal tests of endurance and strength. But Alex, the human, had defied every expectation, each trial seeming to only fuel their resolve even further. The first day had been a nightmare. The intense heat of the desert, followed by the violent sandstorms, had driven most of the recruits to collapse in exhaustion. Yet Alex had pushed on, showing an uncanny ability to adapt, to survive. The next few days, however, had been even worse. The terrain had shifted from one nightmare to another, from scorching desert to freezing tundra, the cold so sharp it cut to the bone. A chilling blizzard had caught Alex in its grip, the winds howling like the roar of 1,000 beasts, the snow blinding and fierce. Yet Alex had not faltered. They had pressed on, moving with a focus and determination that seemed almost otherworldly. It was as if nothing could break them, no matter how harsh the environment. The commanders had been watching, their eyes fixed on the human's progress. They had seen how Alex handled the first few tests, but they had assumed the worst was yet to come. The blizzards were nothing compared to the creatures that roamed this planet. The beasts that stalked the frozen wasteland were predators, cunning and deadly, moving with terrifying speed and precision. The alien soldiers who had attempted the course before had all fallen victim to these creatures, their screams echoing in the icy winds before they were silenced. Yet when Alex encountered these creatures, they didn't run. They didn't scream. Instead, they had taken a different approach, one that left the commanders baffled. Alex had observed the creatures carefully, noting the way they moved, the way they hunted in packs. They had learned their patterns, their weaknesses, and when one of the beasts had charged toward them, Alex didn't try to fight. They simply stepped aside, letting the creature charge past them. Another predator had approached from behind, but Alex had used the snowstorm to their advantage, blending into the environment, hiding in plain sight. The commanders watched in awe as the human calmly outwitted the creatures, staying one step ahead, never panicking, never losing control. The days blurred together. As Alex ventured deeper into the wilderness, the trials grew more intense. The environment was relentless storms, earthquakes, freezing temperatures. But Alex had adapted, each challenge met with a new strategy, a new solution. The human used everything at their disposal, from the terrain itself to their own sheer willpower, to survive. It was a quiet kind of resilience, one that the commanders had never witnessed before. They had all faced one breaking point or another, whether it was the physical toll or the mental exhaustion. No one could endure the strain for long. But Alex was different. Their body, bruised and battered, was still moving, still pressing forward. The commanders had seen it all before: defeat, desperation, and the eventual surrender of every recruit who had come before. But they hadn't seen this. They hadn't seen a human who seemed to be getting stronger, more resolute with every passing day. A new challenge arrived in the form of a massive chasm hundreds of meters wide, with no visible means of crossing. The ground around it was jagged, unstable, and treacherous. Most recruits would have given up at the sight of such an obstacle, their morale crushed by the daunting gap. But Alex didn't hesitate. They scanned the environment, finding a narrow rock bridge that extended across the chasm, barely wide enough to walk on. The bridge was shaky, unstable, but it was the only way across. Alex stepped forward, their body tensed in preparation, eyes fixed on the path ahead. As they made their way across, the wind howled around them, threatening to knock them off balance. The commanders watched with bated breath, wondering if this would finally be the end. But Alex didn't falter. With every step, they moved more confidently, more deliberately, as though the perilous heights and the dangerous winds didn't even exist. They crossed the chasm with remarkable skill, their heart racing but their movements controlled. When they reached the other side, the commanders were left in stunned silence. Alex had conquered what had been an impossible obstacle with ease, showing a calmness under pressure that no one had expected. But there was no time to celebrate. The next stage of the course was designed to test the recruits' mental resilience. They were to be placed in a simulated environment, a psychological gauntlet that would push them to their breaking points. The human mind, they knew, was a fragile thing, and no species had ever passed this stage without cracking under the pressure. Alex was placed in a room filled with mirrors, each one reflecting a distorted, nightmarish version of themselves. The reflections taunted them, distorted their appearance, showing versions of Alex that were grotesque and twisted. The commanders watched as the simulation began, expecting Alex to panic, to break down, to lose their grip on reality. But once again, the human did not falter. Instead of letting the distorted images consume them, Alex took a deep breath, grounding themselves in the present. They refused to give in to the terror. They knew the reflections were just illusions, products of the simulation. Slowly, methodically, Alex began to ignore the twisted images, focusing instead on their breathing, their steps, their reality. With each passing minute, the mirrors began to lose their power over them. The reflections faded, and the room became still. Alex had passed the psychological test, showing a mental fortitude that was just as remarkable as their physical strength. The commanders could no longer hide their shock. They had seen resilience in many forms before, but nothing like this. Alex was defying every expectation, every limit that had been placed on them. The human had endured the trials of the course, not just surviving but thriving, demonstrating a level of strength and resilience that left the commanders speechless. And as the final stage of the course approached, they could only wonder, what was it about this human that made them so different, so resilient? How had Alex turned what should have been an insurmountable challenge into a series of victories? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain: Alex was rewriting the very definition of resilience. And the commanders would never forget what they had witnessed. The air was thick with tension as the commanders watched through the glass panel. Their eyes were fixed on the human, a lone figure standing in the middle of the massive, hostile arena. This was supposed to be the ultimate test, a trial that had broken the toughest soldiers from across the galaxy. Yet, there Alex stood, calm and collected, as if the entire arena, with its brutal challenges, were nothing more than a mere game. The alien soldiers surrounding the arena, those who had already failed the test, couldn't understand it. They had watched as the humankind struggled in the past, breaking under the pressure, succumbing to the harsh conditions. But Alex was different. The trial had already begun, and the countdown was ticking down to the first wave of attackers. The ground rumbled, and from beneath the earth, massive creatures began to emerge. These beasts, large enough to tear. Inescapable, a true test of endurance and battle strategy. They believed no being, not even a human, could survive. But as the first wave of creatures surged toward Alex, the human didn't flinch. They stood still, their eyes scanning the arena, not with panic, but with a sharp focus. The commanders leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable. They were sure this would be the moment the human broke. After all, no one had ever survived the first wave. The creatures were fast, deadly, and relentless. The human couldn't possibly escape them. Yet, instead of running or attacking blindly, Alex did something unexpected. They waited. The commanders exchanged puzzled looks. What was the human doing? Why wasn't Alex running? Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Alex rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws of the nearest creature. It wasn't a desperate move, though. It was calculated. Alex had been watching, observing the creatures as they moved, understanding their patterns, their instincts. As the first beast lunged at them again, Alex stepped to the side once more, this time grabbing a large, jagged rock from the ground. In a swift motion, the rock was embedded into the creature's side. The beast howled in pain, momentarily stunned. But Alex was already moving again, a blur of motion, evading the creature's retaliatory strike. The commanders were stunned. This wasn't luck. It was strategy. The human wasn't trying to defeat the creatures with brute force, as the other recruits had done. No, Alex was using their environment, using the terrain and the creatures' weaknesses against them. Alex knew that the creatures were relentless, but they also knew that every predator had its flaw. The beasts were strong, but they were predictable, and that predictability was their weakness. As more creatures charged forward, Alex continued to move with precision, dodging and attacking in quick bursts. They used their surroundings to their advantage: rocks, fallen trees, and even the terrain itself. One creature tried to charge at them from behind, but Alex had already anticipated its move. With a quick roll to the side, Alex led the creature straight into a trap, where it became stuck in the mud. The more the beast struggled, the deeper it sank until it was completely immobilized. The commanders could hardly believe what they were seeing. The human wasn't fighting to win in the traditional sense. Alex wasn't trying to overpower the creatures; they were outsmarting them, leading them into situations where they were at a disadvantage. As the first wave of beasts began to fall, the commanders felt a growing sense of unease. This was supposed to be impossible. Yet, the human was surviving. The second wave was even more dangerous than the first. Larger, more aggressive creatures emerged from the depths of the arena, each one armed with powerful claws and teeth capable of tearing through the toughest armor. But Alex remained calm. They had already adapted to the challenges thrown at them, and now, the creatures that once seemed unstoppable were becoming nothing more than obstacles to navigate. The second wave was no different. Alex didn't hesitate. They darted left, then right, leading the creatures into the thick underbrush, where their size and speed worked against them. With each move, Alex's strategy became clearer: use the environment, avoid direct confrontation, and wear the enemies down. But just when the commanders thought they had seen it all, Alex did something unexpected. Instead of retreating further into the terrain, Alex turned and charged directly at one of the largest creatures, something the other recruits had never even considered. As the creature's massive claws slashed down toward Alex, the human slid under its reach, emerging from the other side, where they quickly drove a spear into its underbelly. It was a calculated strike, hitting the creature where it was most vulnerable. The beast roared in pain, its movements slowing, and finally, it collapsed. The arena fell silent, the only sound being the heavy breathing of the remaining creatures. The commanders watched in disbelief. Alex had not only survived, but they had also begun to push the limits of what was possible. The alien soldiers in the stands were no longer laughing, no longer mocking the human's presence. Instead, they were watching in awe as Alex began to take control of the arena, turning it into their battleground. The final stage of the course was now upon them. The last wave of creatures had been released, but Alex wasn't fazed. As the last of the beasts charged forward, Alex stood still, waiting. The creatures, now disoriented and exhausted from the previous waves, had lost their precision. They were angry, but they were no longer organized. This was the moment Alex had been waiting for. In an instant, the human moved. They darted forward, leading the creatures into the center backslash. The arena fell into stunned silence. Alex stood amidst the wreckage, covered in dirt and blood, but still standing. The commanders were in shock. They had watched as the human had not only survived, but had outsmarted and outmaneuvered them at every turn. It wasn't just strength or speed that Alex possessed, it was strategy, an intelligence that allowed them to turn any situation to their advantage. The commanders were left with a single thought: this human was not just a survivor. They were a strategist, a master of tactics and cunning. And for the first time, the commanders wondered if they had underestimated humanity. The alien council sat in a circle, their faces grim, their eyes focused on the large holographic screen in front of them. On the screen, a figure stood alone, a human among them. The human was Alex, a recruit who had just completed the ultimate survival course in a way that no one alien or human had ever seen before. The commanders, who had once thought of humanity as inferior, now watched in disbelief as their strongest warriors stood defeated by a single human. The galaxy had never seen anything like this. The human had not only survived, but had surpassed every expectation. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. These were beings who had conquered countless worlds, defeated species stronger than them, and ruled with fear and superiority. They had never encountered a species like humans, not until Alex came onto the scene. No one had predicted what had happened. Alex had not only mastered the survival course, but had done it in a way that was revolutionary. They hadn't fought their enemies head-on, like the other warriors had. Instead, they had used their brains strategizing, outsmarting, and using their environment to their advantage. In doing so, Alex had changed everything. The tension in the council room was thick. They had underestimated the human race, and now they were paying the price. Alex had proven that the human mind, when applied in the right way, could outsmart even the most advanced species in the galaxy. The question that lingered in the air was clear: what did this mean for the future? Alex had entered the arena as just another recruit, a face in the crowd, but now, after completing the impossible challenge, they were the symbol of something much bigger, a new era. An era where humans were not just survivors, but a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't just Alex's strength or skill that had impressed the alien commanders, but their adaptability and the ability to turn the tide in the most impossible situations. As Alex walked out of the arena, the once hostile and judgmental aliens stood back, silently observing. The pride and arrogance that once defined their demeanor were replaced with uncertainty. They were no longer the dominant force. The respect they had for Alex was unmistakable, but it was a kind of respect that was born from fear as well. A new power had emerged, and it was human. Alex had become a living testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the human race. The first time Alex had entered the arena, the alien commanders had been confident. They had designed the course to be a test of strength and endurance, sure that no human could survive it. The course had been brutal, filled with lethal creatures, hazardous terrain, and challenges meant to break the toughest beings in the galaxy. But Alex had seen through the trials. They understood that it wasn't just about surviving, it was about strategy. Every move they made, every creature they avoided, was a calculated risk. They didn't just react, they predicted, and that was what made them different. For the first few hours, the alien commanders had watched, amused by the humans' attempts to navigate the obstacles. But as time passed and Alex kept surviving, their amusement turned to concern. By the time Alex had defeated the first wave of monsters, it became clear that this human wasn't going to give up. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And with every creature that fell, every trial they passed, Alex was proving that humans weren't just good at surviving. They were excellent at overcoming the odds. The second wave was even worse. Larger creatures with faster reflexes and stronger jaws came charging into the arena, but Alex didn't panic. They observed the creatures, noting their weaknesses. Instead of running from them, Alex used the terrain to their advantage, leading the creatures into the forest where their size worked against them. It was a strategy that seemed almost too simple, but it was incredibly effective. The commanders, who had expected the human to struggle, now found themselves on edge. Alex wasn't just fighting, they were outsmarting the creatures. By the time the second wave had fallen, the respect for the human had grown exponentially. As Alex moved through the next stages, their moves became more confident, their strategy more refined. What was once an arena of death for the human race had become a stage for them to prove their worth. The human had not only survived, they had dominated. And now, the final wave was approaching. The commanders knew it would be the ultimate test. This final wave was their last chance to prove that the human could be defeated, that they weren't ready for this new world. The ground shook as the final wave of creatures was released. These beasts were unlike anything Alex had faced before, larger, faster, and more aggressive. But Alex didn't falter. They had learned from the previous waves. They knew that this wasn't a fight of strength, but one of will and intelligence. As the creatures closed in, Alex turned and ran, drawing them into a narrow canyon. It was the perfect trap. The creatures, in their hunger for the human, charged without thinking. The human didn't stop running, but instead they ran straight into the canyon, where the creature's size made them clumsy. And that was when Alex made their move. With one swift motion, Alex triggered a series of traps set throughout the canyon, causing massive rocks to fall and trap the creatures. The final wave of monsters was no more. The arena fell silent, and the commanders sat stunned. The human had not only survived but had won. They had used every obstacle, every challenge, as an opportunity to outwit the creatures and emerge victorious. Alex had shown them that humans were not just survivors. They were warriors, intellectuals, and thinkers. They had proven that they were worthy of respect. As the dust settled, Alex stood at the center of the arena, breathing heavily but with a look of determination in their eyes. The alien commanders watched from above, their minds racing with new thoughts. Alex had changed everything. The human race was no longer the underdog. They were a species to be feared, to be respected. This victory wasn't just Alex's, it was a victory for every human in the galaxy. The Council knew that the galaxy was no longer the same. The human race had just stepped into a new era, one that was filled with possibilities. No longer would they be seen as weak or insignificant. The galaxy had just witnessed the power of human resilience, intelligence, and determination. It was the dawn of a new age, one where humans would be at the forefront, respected and feared by all. The commanders knew that this was just the beginning, but they also knew that the future was uncertain. One thing was clear: humanity was no longer something to be dismissed. A new era of respect had begun.